Jai Jai Nityananda Dvaita Gauranga Jai Jai Nityananda Dvaita Gauranga Nitai Gauranga Nitai Gauranga Nitai Gauranga Nitai Gauranga Jai Jai Nityananda Dvaita Gauranga Jai Jai Nityananda Dvaita Gauranga Jai Jai Jasodanandana Shachi Sutta Gaurachandra Jai Jai Rohini Nandana Balarama Nityananda Jai Jai Mahavishnu Avatar Shri Advaita Chandra Jai Jai Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jai Jai Khanda Vasi Narahari Murari Mukunda Jai Jai Swarup Rupa Sanatana Rai Ramananda Jai Jai Yuriya Gauriya Joto Gora Bhakta Vrinda Jai Jai Hoyache Narabe Joto Gora Bhakta Vrinda Tomra Sabai Mili Koro Daya Ami Ati Manda Jana Akur Prane Gaite Pari Anita Gauranga Jana Akur Prane Gaite Pari Anita Gauranga Gaijano Anita Gauranga Janme Janme Anitai Gauranga Seshare Anitai Gauranga Janme Janme Anitai Gauranga Jai Jai Nityananda Dvaita Gauranga Jai Jai Nityananda Dvaita Gauranga. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udiraye Yang Prabrajantamanupetamakrityam Dvaipayano Virahakatara Ajuhava Putreti Tanmayataya Tarvo Vinedus Tangyasa Sunam Apayami Gurumamunina. So, for some reason, I decided I was going to read these 4 chapters. And after I finished reading the whole thing, I'll talk about why I just wanted to, why I wanted to go through this. There we go. So I'll do my very short Bhagavatam Mangalacharana, right? Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So reading chapter 24 of the 3rd canto, and this is the last of the, this is after Kapila is born, right? So we left where we left off. We left off, and there Devahuti was asking for Kardama to give her a son. So Maitreya resumes. So this is the chapter is called The Descent of Lord Kapila. Maitreya resumed. When Devahuti, the daughter of Swayambhuva Manu, who was worthy of all praise, spoke such words full of dispassion, the merciful sage recalled the words of Lord Vishnu and replied as follows. The sage said, "Worry not about yourself, O princess of irreproachable conduct. The immortal Lord will enter your womb at no distant date. You have undertaken sacred vows. God bless you. Hence do you adore the Lord with reverence through control of the senses and religious observances, as well as through austere penance and charitable gifts of money. Propitiated by you, Lord Vishnu will be born as a son to you, thereby spreading my renown also, and will cut the knot of ignorance existing in your heart by instructing you in the knowledge of the Spirit." So this is a big deal that Kapila is going to instruct his mother. His own mother becomes his disciple. Maitreya went on. reposing full faith in the message of the sage Kardama. Out of a great regard for him, Devahuti too betook herself to the worship of the immutable Supreme Person as the preceptor of the world. After a pretty long time, Lord Vishnu, the slayer of the demon Madhu, manifested himself first through the generative fluid of Kardama and then through Devahuti, even as fire appears through firewood. So the generative fluid is the idea, the virya. He appeared in the virya. At the time of his descent on earth, gods in the form of raining clouds sounded musical instruments in the shape of thunderclaps in the sky. The Gandharvas, celestial musicians, sang praises to him, while Apsaras, celestial nymphs, danced through joy. Heavenly flowers rained by the gods, flying in the air, dropped from the heavens, and all the quarters, as well as the waters of lakes, rivers, and the minds of the people too became clear. Brahma, the self-born, went along with Marichi and the other sages to that celebrated hermitage of Kardama, surrounded by the river Saraswati. Brahma, who is naturally possessed of true wisdom, already knew that the Lord, who is no other than the Supreme Brahman, had descended through pure sattva for imparting the knowledge of the Sankhya system of philosophy. O vanquisher of foes, welcome with a guileless mind the intention of the Lord. Welcoming with a guileless mind the intention of the Lord, the Creator spoke thus to Kardama and Devahuti, with all his senses greatly delighted. Brahma said, "You have truly worshipped me, dear son, in that you reverently carried out my behest, O respecter of elders. This is the service that ought to be rendered by the sons to their father, that they should bow to the command of their father with due deference, saying, 'Very well.' These slender-waisted daughters of yours, my worthy child, will multiply this creation manyfold through their descendants. Therefore, give away your daughters this very day to the foremost of the sages, with due regard to the girl's temperament and liking, and thereby spread your fame all over the globe. I know the most ancient person, the bestower of all boons on living beings, has descended through his own Maya, his wonderful creative energy, in the person of Kapila, O Kardama." Turning to Devahuti, he said, "With golden hair, lotus-like eyes, and lotus feet, whose souls bear the mark of a lotus, it is Lord Vishnu who has been born of you, O Devahuti, to tear up the roots of karma in the form of latent desires through the instrumentality of shastric knowledge and realization. Having cut out the knot of ignorance and misapprehension, he will roam about the earth. He will be the Lord of the Siddhas, held in great esteem by the teachers of the Sankhya system of philosophy. He will be known all over the world by the name of Kapila and will spread your fame. So there's a bit of, there are Puranic quotes that say that this Kapila and that Kapila are two different people. But it's obvious that the Bhagavatam character is based upon the Kapila of the previous tradition. So like in the Bhagavatam, we see that kind of appropriation going on in several places. Naturally, they do it with the gods like Indra and Shiva and Brahma. But also, Rishabha is one of the Arhats, the Tirthankaras of the Jain religion. And the Buddha has also been assimilated, turned into an incarnation. So in this way, the idea of giving everybody a place in the pantheon of Vaishnavism as a way of assimilating and at the same time showing superiority, because evidently the Kapila that we have here in the third canto is not the same philosophy as the Kapila or the original Sankhya philosophy. This is Seshwara Sankhya-vada. So there is some difference. Maitreya continued. Having thus reassured the couple, Brahma, the creator of the universe, rode on his mount, the swan, and returned to Satyaloka, the highest of the spheres, stretching beyond the three worlds, along with Sanaka and his three brothers, and accompanied by Narada, who are all lifelong celibates, leaving behind the other sages, Marichi and the rest, so as to enable them to espouse the hand of Kardama's 9 daughters. So now it's become fashionable to have sannyasis come to your wedding, but previously that was not considered appropriate. So the Kumaras and Narada, they all left the scene so that the other ones could get married and there would be no inauspiciousness at their marriage. So after the departure of Brahma, O Vidura, the sage Kardama immediately gave away his daughters to the Prajapatis, Marichi and the others, as directed by the Creator, according to the injunctions of the Shastras. He gave the hand of Kala to Marichi, and Anasuya to Atri. Shraddha he gave away to Angira, and Havirbhu to Palastya. He further gave Gati, who was worthy of Pulaha, to the latter, and the virtuous Kriya to Kratu, Khyati to Bhrigu, and even so Arundhati to Vasishta. And to Atharva he gave the hand of Shanti, through whom a sacrifice is successfully accomplished. When they were duly married, Kardama propitiated these foremost sages, as well as their wives, with kind attentions. Being thus married, the sages thereupon took leave of Kardama and departed, full of joy, each for his own hermitage. Having come to know that it was Lord Vishnu himself, who is possessed of 3 pairs of divine attributes, power and affluence, piety and renown, wisdom and dispassion, in their entirety, the foremost of the gods, who had been born as a son to him, the sage approached him when he was all alone, and bowing to him said, "Alas, on those who are burning in this hell of transmigration as a result of their own evil deeds. The gods showered their grace after a long time. Contrary to this, the Lord, whose truth striving souls seek to realize in lonely places through concentrated practice of devotion, matured through many lives, and who promotes the cause of his devotees, has this time appeared in the house of sensual men like us, not minding the ignominy incident to such a birth, intent on enhancing the dignity of his devotees. You have been born into my house just to redeem your pledge and to found the Sankhya system which leads to true knowledge. O Lord, your transcendent forms alone are worthy of you. Even so, the human semblances that appeal to your own devotees are as well liked by you, even though you are devoid of a material form. I take refuge in you, whose footstool is always fit to be saluted by sages keen to know the truth, and who are perfect in power and energy, wisdom and dispassion, fame and affluence. I take refuge in Kapila, the Supreme Lord, who has all the potencies at his beck and call, who appears as primordial matter, the spirit, the Mahat Tattva, or the principle of cosmic intelligence, the time spirit, the threefold, sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic ego, and the various spheres as well as their guardians, and then reabsorbs all these phenomena into himself by virtue of his energy in the form of consciousness, and who is the all-witnessing seer. How's that one there? Param pradhanam purusham mahantam kalam kavim trivritam alokapalam atmanubhutyanugata prapancham swachchanda shaktim kapilam prapadye asma viprichedya patim prajanam Tvayavatirnana utaptakama paribrajat padavimastitoham charishye tvam hridiyunjan vishoka. Acquitted of the debt I owed to my father, Brahma, who had commanded me to marry and beget children, and having gained all of my desires through you, I now take leave of you, the Lord of all created beings. Treading the path of recluses, I would roam at will, free from sorrow, contemplating on you in my heart. So Kapila has been born. I don't think we have to take it. This is the very same instant. But he's old enough to be talking and in a mature way. So let's say he's not abandoning him the moment of his birth. The daughters have all had enough time to grow and to get married. So he's been around the house, let's say, with the children for at least a good, let's say, 10, 12, 15 years. Speaking, of course, in our time and not in the time of the Satya Yuga. So the Lord replied, Whatever I say is an authority to the world in matters secular as well as sacred. Therefore, it is only to redeem what I said to you that I have been born as your son. O sage, my present birth in this world is meant only for expounding the true nature of the categories, so helpful in self-realization to those seeking release from their subtle body. This mysterious path of self-knowledge has been obscured through long ages. Know that this personality has been assumed by me in order to revive that path. Allowed by me, go wherever you like, and conquering death, which is exceedingly difficult to conquer, through actions dedicated to me, adore me, with a view to attaining immortality. Beholding me, the supreme self-effulgent spirit, dwelling in the heart of all beings. In your own heart, through your intellect, you will be freed from all sorrow and attain the fearless state. Final beatitude. To my mother as well, I shall impart that spiritual knowledge which frees one from the bondage of all actions, and by virtue of which she will get over the fear of transmigration and attain supreme joy. Maitreya resumed, thus addressed by the celebrated Kapila, Kardama, the Prajapati, went around the Lord as a mark of respect and straightway withdrew to the forest full of joy. Observing about, so now these are the verses that were quoted in the Priti Sandarbha, so we're not entirely abandoning the Priti Sandarbha connection here. The point about the Priti Sandarbha, we'll get to that, let me just finish up here. Observing a vow of non-violence practiced by hermits and exclusively depending on Sri Hari, the Supreme Spirit, the sage renounced the sacrificial fire as well as a permanent dwelling and roamed about the globe, free from attachment. He fixed his mind on Brahma, the infinite, who is beyond both cause and effect, who though devoid of the three gunas, the modes of Prakriti, yet brings them to light, and who had been realized through exclusive devotion, free from egotism and the sense of mindedness, indifferent to pairs of opposites, such as heat and cold, pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow. The viewing all with the same eye. Kardama perceived his own self everywhere. His mind had turned inward and was perfectly composed, and the self-possessed sage looked like an ocean without waves. His mind being fixed through supreme devotion on the all-knowing Lord Vasudeva, the self, the inner controller of all embodied souls. He was now free from the bondage of ignorance. He perceived the Lord, his own self, as present in all living beings, and all living beings in the Lord, his own self. In this way, Kardama, who had no desires and was free from malice, who was even-minded towards all, and who had developed devotion to the Lord, attained union with him. So there were three highlights that were brought up by Jiva Goswami. That it starts that he was he fixed his mind on Brahman, the infinite. And then the second part was his mind being fixed through supreme devotion on the all-knowing Lord Vasudeva, the self of all embodied souls. He was now free from the bondage of ignorance. And then he perceived the Lord, his own self, as present in all living beings, and all living beings in the Lord, his own self. In this way, Kardama, who had no desire and was free from malice, and who was even-minded towards all, and who had developed devotion to the Lord, attained union with him. So that Prapta Bhagavati Gatim, that's the third attainment there. Well, I found that was a rather interesting story, and especially for the let's say the sexual content. It's first of all, of course, when I recite a story like this, you present it, what is the picture of the culture or the society that is being drawn for the benefit of the audience, of the people who are listening to this story being told. So the Bhagavad is operating on different levels. So when you go to a public discourse on the Bhagavatam, then the story dominates. The story dominates, and the story has always has some moral to it. So this story is full of morals of Sri Dharma. In a sense, it's about Sri Dharma. That's why I said I found it touching. Of course, I said this the first time around when I was telling the story. I think the first time around. That it's hard not to feel touched in the modern age. And of course, there are some fantastically happy married couples, and I know many of them. And I certainly did not fall into that category. And it's one of the critiques, of course, of our entire it's one of the critiques of our system, this negativity of what someone was throwing around the word erotophobia the other day to me. So I had made I made a bit of I made a few arguments and tried to present my point of view about the erotic side of human nature and how one can dovetail it with the main purpose, which is spiritual progress. So the image that's being presented by Kardama and Devahuti and their particular marriage and the way that their marriage has been idealized. You notice that she is from Kshatriya stock, Manu, even though they're all coming from Brahma. Manu is a king. He's a king. So he's taking the role of a Kshatriya. And Kardama is a Brahmin. So it's a union of Kshatriya and Brahman. And so this is, a kind of a union of the strengths. It's almost expressed when Manu is giving Devahuti to Kardama. He expresses it in the way that arranged marriages are always expressed, as having a kind of a diplomatic side to it, that it was a sign of the that the Kshatriyas and the Brahmins were in a relationship of mutual protection. That that society was seen as being fundamentally based on the principle that the human form of life was meant not for the accumulation of riches and so on, but rather for the simple purpose of promoting the culture of spiritual life. So in the Satya Yuga, this was austerities and yoga and meditation and so on. So the kings were protecting the sages in the forest, and the Brahmins, through their culture of spiritual life and through their explorations of the inner being, were like the scientists of their time, exploring the inner self, exploring the inner world, exploring the world through the means of subjectivity. I read somewhere that one historian of science was saying that he was that the founders of the Enlightenment and the inventors of the scientific method, Locke and Hume and Descartes and all the rest. And he said they saved us from subjectivity. So yes, that the discovery of subjectivity. So what are the shapes of the inner self, and then to see the world as corresponding to those inner shapes. At any rate, the Indian system was different from that developed in most parts of the world. And the goal was seen always as being to prepare oneself for the other life. The main business of this life was to prepare for the next life. You can still see the residue of this attitude to life in India, where everything is treated with such cavalier insouciance that there's no, that it's all to be gone tomorrow. I remember when I was here in India the first time, then it was this party, I think it was called the Ram Raja Party, I don't know, Jai Guru Dev there in Mathura, Jai Guru Dev had a political party, and their slogan, I don't know what their slogan was, but they were writing on all the telephone poles and all the walls, and they had this slogan, the Ye bhi nahi rahega, that this too shall not remain. Kind of an approach to politics that just somehow doesn't fit the 20th century or 21st century anymore. Certainly not, anyway. So to go back to this other age, this is what I was getting at when I started to read this. We're going back to the Prajapati age, we're going back to the Satya Yuga. And then we have another age that follows. We have, of course, the Rama and the Krishna and so many other worlds that belong to the mythological jungle of Hinduism. And then we have our own Chaitanya world. And then we have our more recent Vaishnava world. And then we have today's world. And we who come from other worlds and come to this world. Or come, let's say, to not just one, but come to the dozens of worlds that are in the Bhagavatam, or in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, or in the lives of saints, and so on. So in this particular story, what's happening, that the whole purpose is for him to create progeny. So anything that we say now has to take into account the fact that nobody wants to create progeny anymore. That progeny has become a great anchor on the weight of most people, like raising children, putting them through university and all the different things that are expected of a life. These things are extremely demanding. And in the modern age, people have been so trained up in individualism, and men and women alike, that they are always measuring things in terms of how it suits their own life plan, let's put it that way. So if they're being held back, if they are ambitious at all, and they feel they're being held back by a spouse, they'll not sacrifice their life plan for their spouse, but they will sacrifice the spouse for the life plan. And in some respects, that's been given credence in the Indian system. Of course, the husband leaving the wife to take sannyas, this was considered to be appropriate. And here in this particular case, we see that Devahuti is being left with Kapila, and that not only is she being left with him, but he's also giving her instructions. So he's giving her a particular form of love as a son, but as a son, he's showing his, just like you could imagine a son who becomes an expert violinist or something, the way that he pleases his mother by having some extraordinary talent. So Devahuti had the chance to be the first student of Kapila. How much did she know? Well, of course, she's an educated woman. She's the daughter of a king. She's a princess. And she's very strong-minded. And she's very faithful and very committed. And of course, she's got all the good qualities of a sadhaka, also peaceful. And so she had the blessing of being the student of the incarnation of God, who had come for the express purpose of teaching the Sankhya philosophy. Usually in real life, people become anthropomorphized post facto. When people are alive, this is one of the reasons when I was talking about the Samantaka money, the Samantaka jewel, what strikes me is there's something that is very ancient about that story that somehow provokes in me the thought when I'm speaking now with my academic hat on, my historian hat on, looking for the historical Krishna, and trying to find things that might conceivably belong to the category of the historical Krishna. So, the first thing one is supposed to do is to eliminate all miraculous events. but in the middle of the Samantaka story. Because why? Because the people right there, his allies, his own family, and they all become, changed by this greed for the Samantaka money. And then Krishna himself is the victim of rumors that he himself is the culprit who is absconded with the Samantaka jewel. And so all these things, these are not the type of stories that would necessarily fit into a stereotyped hero tale or avatar story. It's so interesting to try to look for historical evidence. At any rate, here with Kapila, he is been, everyone knows now, because the way the story is being told from a knowing position. So now we know Kapila is an incarnation. But perhaps when Kapila was first time around, he wasn't thought of as an incarnation. That's what I mean. It comes afterwards, people start calling them an incarnation. It's not that the parents always knew from the very beginning that this was an incarnation. But when we take a hagiographical approach, then of course the parents know beforehand. At any rate, the story we're getting an idealized picture here. So now, when Kardama, several times now, both at the time when he's making his appeal to Shukla Bhagavan, or when he's speaking to Manu about getting married, or, well, at any rate, at least on a couple of occasions there, Kardama does a bit of self-reproach that I have a material desire. So I still have some material desire. The desire to have a wife and to have children and have a family. These things, even though I was ordered to do them by Brahma, it must be understood that that desire is present within me. I was born on account of my previous karmas and my previous vasanas, my previous desires. So because of that, I had some desire for material life, for householder life, for family life, to enjoy the company of a beautiful woman and to live in the comfort of association of a loving wife. So he discredits the desire. He doesn't give this desire any kind of absolute value. It belongs to the category of kama, dharma, artha, kama. And so that's where he's placing it. He doesn't give it any kind of grandiose, well, at least it's just humility. Because we do see that Lord Brahma afterwards tells him, thanks him, says that you've done exactly what a good son should do. You've obeyed your father, not like these guys, right? Not like the son, like the Kumaras or like Narada. So you're a good son, and so you get my blessings, right? And these daughters of yours, they're going to go and fill the world with progeny, and you have the son Kapila who's come here, incarnation of God. I think it's a pretty good job. Let's give a hand to Kardama Muni, and now let him go free, right? So Kardama says, all right, I've done my job, and he gets a handshake from Brahma. The daughters get married, and Kardama leaves home and goes to the forest and attains Krishna in the very end. So the description. So now let's go back into the beginning. So first of all, how does it work? Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. So when you have Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, and Dharma is the beginning part is the Dharma. And so Dharma means to become good at something, right? It means really, I like the idea of a vocation. At least at one level of meaning, Dharma means a vocation. So of course nowadays we don't, nowadays the idea of vocation, well, it's been lost a little bit. It was a strong concept in Lutheran Christianity. The idea that we all have a calling. Vocation means a calling, that God calls to us to do a particular kind of service in life. So whether that service, there's no service that's not noble. To take care of sheep or to take care of cows or whatever humble task one has been assigned or allotted life in life, all of them are to be considered as glorious. And so people, the idea of being called, of having a mission in life, or to have something that God expects of one in life, that's really what dharma means. It's a vocation. What is your job? So the vocation of a Brahmin or the vocation of a Kshatriya would be quite different, but they belong to general broad categories. And then you have other kinds. So now these categories have been subdivided into many, many, many minute categories. Mostly, we're all Shudras, even with some added intellect, let's say. So, Dharma, in the beginning, Kardama has perfected his Dharma because he's had the vision of Shukla Bhagavan. Bhagavan has appeared to him. And so Shukla Bhagavan tells him, that he'll be getting married, that Manu would come to give him his daughter, and so on, because Kardama prayed to him to fulfill this desire, that he would be able to fulfill the order of his father and to fulfill his own desire to enjoy married life and to have children. So that he was already perfected, so that was his dharma. So he'd already reached the pinnacle of his dharma. So now in the modern world, let's say, in the modern world, one has to also have some kind of a dharma. In India, it's very clear. You have to have a job. If you don't have a source of income, then you can't get married. So you get an education and so on and so forth, and then you get yourself a source of income, and then you're qualified to get married. So in India, where generally speaking, men and women don't mix that much, the man has a long haul in which he has to practice Brahmacharya, whether it's voluntary or not. So this can lead to problems when desires are stirred up by the media and so on, and by the film industry, and one has no outlet for desire. This can lead to problems. But even in the West, where sexuality is supposedly much freer, and that teenagers experiment a lot with sexuality, still the idea of a permanent relationship, of having some close bonding with another human being, that's actually something that people secretly pine for, even though it's becoming more and more difficult to achieve. And one of the reasons it's becoming more difficult to achieve is because the whole business of Dharma is getting confused and nobody really knows what their vocation is. Anyway, Dharma and then Artha. So what was Kardama? Well, his Artha was his reputation. So Artha can usually mean money. So Kardama, he himself didn't have any wealth, and he had his wealth stored up in the magical powers, in the siddhis that he had attained as a byproduct of his different austerities and so on. So when Devahuti comes and says to him, all right, when she gets his blessings, and he thanks her for her service and so on, and she says to him, well, now it's time for you to come through. You're supposed to be, we're supposed to, so we can assume that up until that point, they haven't had any sexual relationships at all. And so both of them are restored to their youthful beauty before their austerities. And they go into that dream world, the aerial mansion, where they float through the worlds, like on a grand world tour, a world cruise for their honeymoon that lasts for thousands of years. And they visit all the celestial gardens where they make love. And throughout all this, he is retaining his semen. So the whole thing is that Artha, the ability to have this Artha, it makes Kama possible. Right? So Dharma makes Artha possible. So if one is not successful in Dharma, then forget it about Artha. And if he doesn't have Artha, well, Kama, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen so well. Right? Without money, as one person said, without finance, there's no romance. So to be able to have a life of satisfactory sexuality. But according to this, it would seem that, of course, that this unbridled and passionate and celestial sexual enjoyment that Kardama had with Devahuti, waiting for a final climax when he expands into 9 forms and impregnates her 9 times. Climactic, the sexual passion has grown to such an extent that he has to take 9 forms in order to be able to satisfy her. They say about, there's that famous verse that says a woman's sexuality or a woman's desire is 8 times that of a man. Well, perhaps this was meant to show that. And then, really, the ardors diminish. So this is an actual fact, of course. Many people in married life know this, that once you have some children, that it usually it has a tendency to have an impact on sexual life. A man has to work usually, and when there are many children, the woman is busy around the house taking care of the kids. You can imagine if there's 9 or 10 children, and the housework is a big job, management and so on. While the husband is usually in traditional homes, would be going out and earning the money. So, the sage, a sage like Kardama, he would attract rich donors like Manu, and to the extent that he would need for he would have clients for sacrifices or people who would come to listen. And generally speaking, hermitages would be places that people would visit and to visit the holy man and to give some donation. This would be quite an ordinary thing. So, Kardama and his wife. So the picture that here. So I, living here in the 21st century, have had some. I was interested in authenticity. But for me, this story here, the idea that there is no real that to maximize here you could say that Kardama and Devahuti, they maximized their enjoyment of sexual pleasure. They maximized their enjoyment of sexual pleasure, and they did not do it in any way that hindered their spiritual development. In fact, their passion, their ardor, resulted in the birth of a incarnation of God, of extraordinary intellectual ability. So the connection there is if the parents, if they make love, if their love making is profound and deep and joyful, then this will create a bond and will create children, will result in children who are of extraordinarily high quality. So you have a high quality husband and a high quality wife who love each other, to having passionate sexual union, giving birth to an incarnation. So in sometimes the Krishna story, you often get the idea Anakat and Dubi, that is to say, Vasudeva, he was transmitted not through seminal discharge. So, but here in this case, there's no, it's stated on more than one occasion that it was the virya, it was the semen, that through the semen, through Kardama's semen, that Kapila entered the world. But then Kardama leaves. So Kardama leaves, and that means that this was not something that this kind of sexual experience was not the end of spiritual life. Now, the point here, of course, is that if a man and a woman are both spiritually minded, then, and if they are trained, let's say, if their mind has been trained yogically to be single-pointed, to have ekagrata, if they're trained in the performance of meditation, and if their bodies are healthy, and as a result of yogic practice, if they have a mantra that's been given to them by a guru, especially if the husband is the guru of the wife, then control over the sexual act in terms of seminal retention, this should be considered as something as basic as learning the alphabet if you're going to be spending any of your time in the future reading So the practice of Brahmacharya, even within householder life, is a very important little piece of knowledge that everyone should have. Because what that does, it strengthens the bond. We want, even though the Shastras tell us that one has to be free from attachments, even in householder life, a family cannot function properly without attachments, without love, without the creation of bonds of affection and love. And a Vaishnava is actually cultivating the practice of love. And a Vaishnava is cultivating the awareness of the presence of God in those people who are around him. Because before you can start seeing God as present in all beings, it's a good idea to start with the beings who are close to you, especially those beings you profess to love. So cultivating awareness of the presence of God in those who are closest to you, and especially those with whom one has the closest and most intimate relationship, that has the physical component to it. So I see the relationship of a husband and a wife as the relationship of a sadhaka and a sadhika. That the two of them should be cultivating prema bhakti to Radha and Krishna. So that prema bhakti, here what we see in Kardama and Devahuti, this is actually on a very basic, this is exactly what's going on here. Now here in this particular case, Kardama is obviously leading the way, and Devahuti is obviously following. But that is special characteristic. The Bible says that they leave their parents and they become as one flesh. A husband and wife, they become an entity unto themselves, bound together by the glue, by the sealing power of love. So now, if you can't see God in the presence of love, right, later on it's going to come in Kapila's own teachings, when he starts talking about seeing the presence of God in those who are living and present, instead of just seeing God as being on the altar. And that doesn't just mean that's a whole concept of understanding, a whole concept, a whole way of seeing God. So certainly in terms of creating community, in terms of creating community and families, and a family starts from the union of a man and a woman. It's very trite to say this. So even though the whole Bhagavatam and all the Hindu scriptures are very much dedicated to the idea of renunciation, 99% of people don't become renunciates. They live lives as householders. So somehow or another, all their activities, including the activity of lovemaking, has to be purified somehow or another by imbuing it with characteristics that promote one's spiritual consciousness, the ekagrata. So there's no law that says when one is making love to one's wife or to one's husband that one should not chant the holy name, that one should not chant one's mantras, that one should not remember Radha and Krishna's leelas, that one should not sing those leelas even as one makes love. The idea is to think of Radha and Krishna and to become one with Radha and Krishna's leela. So if one has faith in the Madhura leela, one should understand that this is a possibility. And this is a possibility, this is a practice that can be possible. But it has its dangers and it has its drawbacks. And those are things that one has to understand. In order to understand these things, it's quite proper to study the appropriate texts. So I think I'll leave it there today, but I thought that was a very interesting story. And the reason I came back to it again, not just because I wanted to talk about this aspect of so-called, of the nature of sexual pleasure as it's depicted in this story. I wanted to try to understand why, well, I felt that for some reason that Jiva Goswami had mentioned both something that came from the earlier parts of the story and this final conclusion. So what was told before was that these gifts and so on that you have earned through your tapasya, through your austerities, you have earned this 10,000-year trip on an aerial mansion, visiting all the wonderful places in the universe. We'll visit all the lokas. So this is that you get this seeming material desire, not interfering with or upsetting the attainment of Kardama in getting Samipya Mukti and of attaining the close association of the Lord and being with Him, Bhagavatim Gatim. All right then, so we'll continue on with the next chapter of this Priti Sandarbha. We're talking about Sayujya for a little bit. Jai Jai Radhe Krishna Govinda, Jai Jai Radhe Krishna Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Radhe Govinda, Jai Jai Radhe Krishna Govinda, Jai Jai Radhe Krishna Govinda, Jai Vrindavan Chandra Jai Jai Radha Raman Ras Bihari Shri Gokulananda Jai Jai Radha Kanta Radha Vinod Shri Radha Govinda Jai Jai Raseshwari Vinodini Bhanukula Chandra Jai Jai Lalita Vishakayadi Jata Sakhi Vrinda Jai Jai Sri Rupa Manjari Adi Manjari Ananga Jai Jai Purnamasi Kundalata Jaya Nandi Vrinda Tomra Kripa Kori Deo He Jugal Charanaravindo Deho Jugal Charanaravindo Deho Jugal Charanaravindo Deho Jugal Charanaravindo Jai Jai Radhe Krishna Govinda Jai Jai Radhe Krishna Govinda Radhe Govinda Radhe Govinda Radhe Govinda Radhe Govinda Radhe Govinda Radhe Govinda Jai Jai Radhe Krishna Govinda Jai Jai Radhe Krishna Govinda. Jai Jai Sri